It's interesting how we constantly analyze boomers and millennials. We scrutinize Gen Z as if they're a brand new psychological experiment unfolding in real time. Yet right in the middle sits a generation that rarely gets center stage. Generation X, those born between the mid-1960s and around 1980, often passes through conversations almost unnoticed. They're the managers who don't announce every achievement, the parents who love deeply but don't narrate their feelings online, the architects of early digital culture who somehow remain offline most of the time. And here's the quiet truth. Their psychological makeup may be the least understood of any generation currently alive. To understand them, you have to picture a very specific scene. It's the late 1970s. You're 8 or 9 years old. School ends and you walk home to an empty house. Both parents are still at work. There are no text messages, no GPS tracking, no way for anyone to casually check in. You unlock the door, drop your backpack, make something to eat, and begin your homework alone. By the mid-1980s, millions of children between 5 and 13 were regularly unsupervised after school. That wasn't the exception, it was normal. An entire generation grew up internalizing a simple lesson: you cannot assume someone will be there. That daily solitude didn't just produce independence, it trained cause and effect into their nervous systems. When your parents finally came home and discovered you'd broken a rule, consequences were immediate. There was no extended family discussion about feelings, no negotiation. You stepped out of line, and the outcome followed quickly. Psychologists describe environments like that as highly contingent, where actions and consequences are tightly connected. When you grow up inside that structure, your brain becomes finely tuned to anticipating outcomes. You begin calculating risks automatically. That's one reason many Gen X adults instinctively think several steps ahead. They had to. At the same time, they were watching the adult world fracture. They heard constant promises about stability and loyalty. Then they watched divorce rates climb throughout the 1970s and 80s. They saw parents dedicate decades to companies only to be downsized when economic tides shifted. The social contract felt shaky. The message was clear: work hard, follow the rules, trust the system. The reality was, the system could change without warning. What some psychologists might label defensive pessimism, Gen X tends to interpret as realism. They don't assume catastrophe, but they prepare for it. They hope things go well, yet quietly brace for disruption. Emotional armor became practical equipment. This mindset also explains their complicated relationship with visibility. They were raised in a world where mistakes faded quietly. If you embarrassed yourself, maybe a few classmates remembered. That was the extent of it. There were no viral moments preserved forever. Privacy wasn't a strategy, it was the default. So broadcasting personal details to strangers feels less like empowerment and more like exposure. It's not technological confusion, it's a deeply ingrained sense that safety increases when you limit what others know about you. Humor became another survival tool. Sarcasm, irony, dry wit, these weren't just personality quirks, they were buffers. Growing up under the shadow of the Cold War meant practicing duck-and-cover drills while adults spoke casually about nuclear annihilation. The world felt fragile, yet everyone insisted everything was fine. Holding contradictory realities at once, existential threat and everyday normalcy, required psychological distance. Irony provided it. And yet, despite the skepticism and guardedness, something remarkable developed in their approach to work. Gen X rarely markets their effort. They simply execute. Their early jobs were often gritty and unglamorous, delivering newspapers before sunrise, running cash registers without digital assistance, stocking shelves, flipping burgers. These weren't resume-building experiences. They were early encounters with responsibility. A 12-year-old managing a paper route learned logistics. A teenager calculating change without a calculator learned mental agility. Responsibility arrived early, and competence became personal currency. Having watched corporations lay off loyal employees, they rarely romanticized workplace devotion, but they invested heavily in skill. If loyalty couldn't be guaranteed, competence could. You may not control restructuring, but you can control your value in the room. There's a subtle paradox here. Gen X is fiercely self-reliant, yet quietly dependable. They won't readily ask for help. They learned early to handle things themselves. But when someone else needs assistance, they show up, without announcement, without spectacle. Those tight friendships formed during unsupervised childhoods created durable bonds. When adults weren't present, peers became essential. Loyalty shifted horizontally rather than upward. Their relationship with authority reflects this same pragmatism. Titles don't impress them. Skill does. If a leader demonstrates competence, they'll respect it. If not, skepticism surfaces quickly. Growing up amid political scandals and institutional failures trained them to question narratives. Authority had to earn credibility. Economic instability reinforced this outlook. The younger edge of Gen X graduated into the bursting of the dot-com bubble. The older edge faced the 2008 financial crisis mid-career. Repeated financial shocks taught a simple lesson: diversify, prepare, never assume permanence. Multiple income streams weren't always entrepreneurial ambition. Sometimes they were psychological insurance. Yet this independence carries a cost. Research suggests Gen X is less likely to seek social support during stress, not because they lack relationships, but because asking can feel like weakness. Crisis competence becomes both strength and burden. If you've always handled things yourself, leaning on others feels unfamiliar. Their relationship with information followed a similar pattern. Before search engines, answers required effort. You navigated library catalog drawers, flipped through indexes, photocopied pages. Knowledge had friction, and friction deepened memory. Cognitive science shows that effortful retrieval strengthens encoding. Information acquired through labor embeds more firmly. When something broke, you experimented. You flipped the bike upside down and adjusted the chain. You opened the back of the television and tinkered carefully. That tactile problem-solving fostered a belief. Most challenges can be figured out with patience and persistence. Now, as parents, many Gen Xers observe a dramatically different landscape. Their children grow up supervised, scheduled, digitally documented. Gen X often provided the attention they themselves lacked. Yet some quietly wonder whether constant oversight limits resilience. In their worldview, visibility increases vulnerability. Independence builds strength. Generation X may be the final cohort to truly remember boredom, long stretches without stimulation, without immediate answers, without digital distraction. They learned to sit with their thoughts, to invent, to endure silence. This doesn't make them superior. It makes them shaped by a very particular historical moment, a hinge period between analog and digital, between institutional trust and institutional doubt. They became the bridge generation. And bridges rarely receive applause. They exist to connect, to stabilize, to carry weight. Generation X carries weight without demanding recognition. They don't need the spotlight. In fact, they're more comfortable without it. Perhaps that quiet durability, the ability to adapt, to endure, to function without constant validation, is the defining trait of their psychology. If this exploration resonated with you, consider subscribing. And if you'd like to support more long-form deep dives into psychology and generational behavior, joining the channel truly helps. Thank you for being here.